Hey, Walt, it's Dawn.
Hey Don, how you doing?
Good. I just gave you co-host ability, so if you need to share your screen, know if you were doing that or not.
Okay. Okay, yeah, probably will.
Okay. We're waiting. I have 3 other people signed up.
Yeah,
Shannon Smith,
wait.
Tracy, and Sandy Mergenthaler.
Okay.
Who else will jump on?
Yes, right now it's just one, Betsy and
Yep.
me. So you made me the host?
Yep. You're the co-host.
Okay, co-host. Okay.
Yep. That way I can still let people in. You don't have to worry about that.
All right, let's see what I got here. Okay. Can you see my dot loop?
Yep. Yeah, I can see it.
Okay.
Well, I can see the your Google screen.
Okay.
Hi, this is Betsy. Should I come back in a few minutes? I'm a little early.
Hey,
No, you're good, Betsy.
yeah, you're good.
Okay, I'll just leave.
Okay, yeah, I see your dot loop.
All right, so we're good then.
Yep.
So we got a few minutes. We'll just wait, and
Okay.
probably at like 10:01 we'll get started.
Okay.
Hello, hello.
Hello, hello.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
So we're going to wait another minute just to allow others to jump on and see. We want to make sure we get everyone on. And then
Okay.
can you guys see my screen where it says HOA condo docs?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. Okay. So I think we got 11 people on. I think 2 of them are me and Dawn. So wanted to go over, this is a brief synopsis of HOA and condo docs for Maryland and Delaware. The rules are similar, but at the same time, they're different. In Maryland, you must provide HOA and condo docs no matter what, no matter how big or how small the condo. Versus in Delaware, there are limits, right? If you're not sure what the limits are, look at the Kiowa flow chart, and you can also look at how much they pay in fees, and they can be exempt. I know that there's an increase in the on how much people can be charged, and then it went up. I think it's up close to $800 now. If Brad were on the call, he would know the exact figure. He's pretty good at that, but just want to check that when you get into the condo doc and HOA docs. Again, in Maryland, you have to provide them. When you request them from the condo association, they actually have 21 days from the time it's requested to get you the documents. So what do you think they do? They offer to do it quick for more money. And a lot of them will have what's called an expedition fee. So if you ordered the docs late, and you need them quick, sometimes they'll have an expedition fee. In Maryland, if you have less than 7 units, you don't provide as much information as you do if you have more than 7 units. One of our listings, which is a 4-unit complex in Ocean City, went under contract this week. It's a cash deal, supposed to settle in 2 weeks. Luckily, the president, I knew, and he was able to give me all the documents, at least we think it's all, yesterday. And they don't have a formal management company. They do their own budget bylaws. There were no reserves except for the cash they have in the account. And that's just kind of the way that they run those type of situations. The reason we have the HOA and condo doc disclosures, it's been in Maryland for a long time. It hasn't been in Delaware as long. For many years in Delaware, it was something that we would write in. And a lot of times we would write that in just because of our experience in Maryland. But in Maryland, it's been the condominium and HOA resale act. And it is when they sell a new condo in Maryland, you have 15 days to look over those documents. And usually you will be given those documents when you buy the unit with new construction. So you have 15 days. On a resale, the time limit goes down to 7 days. And with homeowners docs, it goes to 5 days. And I think with timeshare, it's like 10 days. So we don't sell a lot of timeshare, but If you ever come across that, it would be very similar. So in Maryland, there's usually a fee. Looking at my screen here, you can see in Maryland, these were the addendums that were in our folder. They can be a little confusing. There's one for the homeowners association. That one wasn't too bad. But if you look at the condo, this is the resale certificate. This is actually what they would fill out, have the owner fill out and be presented with the resale documents. It's similar in Maryland, if you are in Delaware, if you look down, they have the resale certificate, only they call it the common interest community resale certificate. Okay, now I did find it was also labeled here as the Kiowa resale certificate form. These are the exact same form, they just have different names and they're in different templates. So again, I apologize for the confusion on that, but it kind of is what it is. What's going on here? Let's see, sorry. Bear with me. So back to, sorry, I hit a button and I accidentally hit the wrong button. So, and again, here we are. Let's look at these. Let's look at the resale certificate for Maryland. A lot of times the management companies will have this completed, but if not, like the small association of the 4 units that we put under contract this week, we sent this to the condo association and they've completed it. It has signatures for the owners. A lot of times those are blank. You can request that, but a lot of times it doesn't even go to the owner. It goes straight to the manager or president or treasurer, whoever happens to be the one that's filling it out. And it kind of tells you what the assessments are, right? Do they have a first right of refusal? Certain associations used to be able to buy back a unit. I think they did, a lot of them did away with that. If there's any unpaid common expenses that the owner owes, in other words, have they paid their fees? Are they back? And this is the document that the title company is going to want to see, because they're going to go by this, and this is going to be the document from the association that says, hey, you know, how much are the fees? How much does the owner owe? And then when are they due? And how are they prorated? Excuse me. Are there any, number 4, are there any capital expenditures? Most of you may or may not know what a capital expenditure is. A capital expenditure is money they plan to use for improvements in the near future. And this is what it says. Are we planning any major improvements approved by the Council of Owners planned at the time of conveyance, estimated to be 6 months from the date hereon, which are not reflected in the current budget? So in other words, are there any special assessments? And if there are, who's going to pay them? In Maryland, I believe the assessment falls on the owner if it has been levied already. If it's levied after the condominium has been under contract, then you would go back to the buyer, tell them about the new assessment, and decide you're going to have to negotiate who's going to pay that. And they would have an additional 5 days of what's called right of rescission. In other words, they can cancel the contract. If there's any major changes on this form, after they receive it, you go back to them again and they have an additional 5 days to decide if they want to cancel the agreement. Again, this goes on. Attached is a copy of the operating budget, any judgments, any lawsuits. This is going to tell you, you know, is the condo being sued? And we have had condos. You know, Mallard Lakes has a lawsuit, which I understand is about to be settled over flood insurance, over the association. I think some units got flooded there, and the group of owners in that building sued the association, and it became an issue. Now, why is it a big issue? Especially if you're selling a building that's not part of that. Well, the big issue is that the lender also is going to look at this. And if the lender sees a lawsuit, or if they see large delinquency amounts, they're not going to lend on the property. Right now, it's my understanding at Mallard Lakes that they're getting that worked out, but I know of a few local banks, Bank of Ocean City, Taylor Bank, Citizens, I think, County Bank, I think, are ones that will lend in that project, but that's because they're familiar with the project. They understand the lawsuit. But if you go an FHA loan, first time home buyer, some kind of conventional financing, a lot of times they're just going to deny the loan. I took over a listing that we have in Wilmington. It's a beautiful 203-year-old stone house. At this time, the condo, it's part of a condo association. I think it was the original house on the farm. Someone bought it and then built condos on the rest of the land, made the house part of the condominium association. You would not believe the number of calls I get off this house. I mean, it's a big stone house and it's been redone. It's listed for $250,000, and I do believe it has a view of the Delaware River. But when you look at it further, the condos that were built on the same property and part of the same association have a deficit of $365,000 with no plan to pay that back at this time. So the only way we can sell this house is by cash. No lender will even the local banks will not even touch that property. So, these resale certificates do become important, okay? Let's see, judgments. Number 8, the following is general description of the insurance. As you may or may not be aware, most condominium insurance policies cover the fire, flood, and hazard for the building. They do not cover the inside or contents. Okay, so when you have a condominium that you're selling, usually the owner has to get his own, which is called HO6 policy, which is for the inside of the unit, as well as any furniture, because the flood policy for the building does not cover the contents of the condo. So a lot of times if they're in a flood zone and the property is susceptible to flooding, the owner may want to get additional flood. I've had where when things got a little tight and the banks didn't have all the money they have now, back in 2009, certain banks would require the owner to buy additional flood insurance because they weren't satisfied with what the building had. And so that happens from time to time, but you just want to be aware. Usually you're going to get copies of the policies, the front page, what's called the declaration page. They have any knowledge of violation of health codes or common elements. Did someone make a change to the outside? Keep in mind with condos, they should all look the same, right? Except what the builder did in the beginning. You can't have an owner come in and all of a sudden decide he's going to screen in his porch if he's part of a condo, unless all the other owners agree to it. And that's why you have this, what's called right of rescission, is because when you buy into a condo or an HOA, you're becoming a partner with the other owners in the common elements. In a condo, it's the building itself. The grounds outside are considered limited common elements that you own as tenants in common with the other owners of the property. So there could be assessments. Whenever I sell condos, people, the first thing you want to look at, how does the outside of the building look, right? When I drive up, does it look like it's well taken care of? Is there any obvious maintenance issues that haven't been taken care of? Usually with a professional maintenance company, they're going to have it in pretty good shape. The ground should be in good shape. If you go to a condo and there's trash all over the parking lot, obviously, they're not hiring a maintenance guy to come around and pick things up. And it really depends on how big they are. The 4-unit condo, I know they don't have a maintenance guy that picks up trash. I can tell you that right now, they don't have the budget or the money to do that. Without them having reserves, they also don't have the money for a new roof. So what happens? If the roof is $20,000, each owner would have to cough up his share, right? So you could have a special assessment of $5,000 to each owner. Versus if you have a 400-unit building and you have $1 million assessment, it's only $2,500 for each owner. So there's some power in numbers, and you to be aware. Same with the HOA. I don't know if you guys have seen that commercial, the latest Geico commercial, where the lady goes down the street and first she cuts off the plants and says violation, violation, violation. And at the end, she was telling them that the bushes were too high. And then she comes and cuts their mailbox down because it's 2 inches over regulations. That's why some people say to you, I don't want to be a part of an HOA, or I do. Some people like uniformity, right? Other people don't like to be told what to do. So it's all part of the game, but with HOAs come other things as well, right? With HOAs, you also have the amenity packages that go with that. So, there's good, there's bad, but it's important that you kind of understand the reasoning. And that's the reason for the right of rescission, is the fact that you're going to become partners with all these other owners. So therefore you have the right to look over the documents that govern your property, and therefore allow you a vote, as well as participation in the expenses of what you consider a giant partnership, what's called an HOA or a condominium. And keep in mind, you can have some projects that have both, right? You could have an HOA and then you could have a condo within an HOA. Perfect example would be Ocean Pines has that, and so does Bayside in West Fenwick. They have an HOA association, as well as a golf course, as well as condominiums that have condo fees within the same development. So it could be a multitude. Now, what would you do? You have to get them the HOA documents to review. They would have 5 days to review that. You have to get the condo docs to them to review. And they would have in Delaware, I believe it's 5 days to review that as well. In Maryland, it would be 7 days to review that, again, unless it's new construction. So looking at number 10, the following are description of recreation or other facilities which are to be used by the owners, and basically the B part, all the above recreation or other facilities are part of the common elements, except for, maybe the golf course would be excluded. And then it's signed there by usually the condominium, and they'll put either president, secretary, treasurer, or manager. So again, that's a typical, and again, this is a Maryland Realtor form, but it's very similar to the Delaware form as far as the disclosures are concerned. Moving along, again, you can see we have 3 different forms here. This condominium resale notice, and you'll see this attached. This is filled out, and it tells you here, look, if it's part 1, if it's part of 7 units or more, then they have to provide all of the following information, right? If it's 6 units or less, they only have to provide this much information. And again, this addendum would be attached to the contract. Here's the most important part of this addendum, and it's right here where my mouse says, buyer may at any time within 7 days following receipt of all this information rescind in writing the contract of sale without stating a reason and without any liability on buyer's part. Upon rescission, buyer is entitled to the return of any deposit made on account of the contract. The return of any deposit held in trust by a licensed real estate broker to the buyer shall comply with the procedure set forth in the section of Maryland Comar 17-505. Once the sale is closed, the buyer's right to rescind this contract is terminated. So what does that say? It says you have 7 days to rescind if you're a buyer. And what does it say? For any reason. And they have to rescind in writing, right? It also says that if they close without receiving the docs, they lose their right to rescind. In other words, if you go to settlement and you don't get the condo docs, which some people do, if you have a 2-week cash settlement in a condo and you can't get the condo docs and the owner says, that's okay, I don't care about it, they lose their right to rescind. If that were to happen, I would make sure that they sent me something in writing saying they understand they're waiving their right they still have the right, they could rescind up to the time that they receive the documents, even the day of settlement. But there is no waiving of this right, so to speak, is my understanding.
Walt, can I ask a question?
Sure.
Sure. Question regarding, because I see we're looking at the MAR form, and I know, because this question came up recently for someone that was writing a deal for Delaware, and it was my understanding that if you had this resale certificate completed and it was still valid, that if you included it as, say, one of the supplemental documents in the MLS, and therefore the buyer had this at the time they made the offer on the home, that they waive and lose that 7-day right of rescission because they had all of this information at the time they made the offer.
Okay, so you're jumping ahead of me a little bit because I'm still in Maryland.
Sorry.
But that's okay. That's right. It's a great question. The answer is yes, you are correct. If you receive the documents prior to making the offer, it's as if they've already received the notice. That's not the case in Maryland. They would still have the 7-day right of rescission after they have the contract in Maryland. But if they got it with the contract, their 7 days would begin with the contract. If they receive it in Delaware prior to, and an example would be, we had a property, we got the condo documents, the deal fell through. We posted them in the MLS. The next contract came along, they had already seen the documents, so there was no the Kiowa addendum or right of rescission, and that was Delaware. So yes, you are correct. If they receive it in Delaware, it is my understanding that they have waived their right, or they don't have the right because they've already been given the notice. But it's not that way in Maryland. In Maryland, you would still have the right of rescission from the time the contract began. And the only thing, so long as there are no substantial changes to the documents. Someone said to me, how old are condo docs? And I conferred with an attorney, and they said to me, as long as there's no significant changes, the condo docs can be used until there is a significant change. Now, my question would be, well, if you go past a payment period and it says they made the last payment, would that be a significant change? And the answer is maybe, you know. So the documents are good for a certain amount of period. And Bridget, I'm glad you brought that up about that, because, you know, there obviously are difference. Here's back to my folder, right? Now look, I created a folder for Maryland. You can see you have the disclosure of transmittal, in other words, kind of a receipt of the documents, right? You have the resale notice in Maryland. You have the disclosure, right? The resale disclosure certificate. And then you have a homeowners association in Maryland. And I believe there might be another one, but I couldn't find it to put in here. Okay, but look in Delaware, look at how many different, now I did add the blank addendum because sometimes it's needed. But it's just called, in our folder, it's just called the addendum to the agreement of sale. It doesn't say the blank addendum. I kind of renamed this one. And again, some of these documents that we have here in the Delaware folder are the same document. They just have different names. Like the community interest, or common interest community resale certificate was kind of the same as the Kiowa resale certificate form. It's just they were in different templates. So I loaded them all up because I wanted to make sure that you guys kind of saw this and understand. Let's talk about when should we order condo docs, right? Or HO docs, right? And this is, in Delaware, it seems to be that you have to do it within a certain amount of time. But I think in Maryland, let's look at this Maryland form, this comment for HOAs. I believe here it says, right here in this section, the sale is subject to requirement of the Maryland HOA Act. The act requires the seller to disclose to you at or before the time of the contract is entered into, or within 20 calendar days of entering into this contract. So there is a definitive date if you use this addendum, right? And this is for homeowners association. of any size or the initial sale of a lot containing 12 or fewer. I really wish they would just take that part out, say the or, because a resale of a lot within any development would cover, it creates a lot of confusion when you see this or the initial sale of a lot within a development containing 12 or fewer. But this would be the form you would use for a condo resale or an HOA resale, right? And if it had to be a condo within the HOA, you would use both these forms. And again, it says in here, this part says, if you have not received all of the information 5 calendar days or more before entering to the contract, you have 5 days to cancel the agreement, okay? So this one kind of says that if you got it before, you might not have that right to cancel. But then you go on, the seller must also provide a notice of any changes, fees exceeding 10%, right? That stated to exist, and copies of any substantial or material amendment to the information provided to you. You have 3 calendar days to cancel the contract after receiving that, right? So it goes on. And again, these forms are meant to allow buyers to decide whether they want to get into a contract or not as part of the partnership within these developments. Okay, and again, I'll go back to, again, here's the Maryland forms, right? If you're not licensed in Maryland, this doesn't matter, right? But you can see they're similar. And then Delaware, here's the Kiowa flow chart, right? 2019, right? And you look at it, it looks like a spider web kind of, but you kind of follow this down. What is it? Is it new? Is it pre-existing? If it was, then you follow these rules, right? And up to 20 units, not expandable, then you may not have to do it. So you kind of see it goes down the chart here of what you have to do. And then this star is here, it says an increase of 3% each July 1st. So that just happened. So I imagine the fee now was originally, look right up here, $671.95 per unit. And but you have to take that fee, calculate 3% from when that started. And I believe that started, Bridget, I don't know, what do you think? 2014 maybe? So it kind of, that's one you need to check on. And it can be a little confusing. But again, even this chart is a little confusing, right? A little bit at times. So kind of read this over, print it out, look at it. I know they have classes on it. You know, you love when Andy Taylor teaches those classes because he's kind of the guru, right? But, and again, look at all these other forms that we have. Let's look, Delaware Uniform Interest Ownership Act, right? And I see this form used a lot, right? And again, it says that if for any reason the seller shall fail to provide the above information in compliance within 10 days herein allotted, so they're saying you have 10 days, right, to get the information, right? The buyer may within 5 days receiving the resale declare the agreement null and void, right? Now, I know that a lot of times we miss this 10-day window, right? So, and again, who orders the documents? And this is what you have to consider yourself. When do you order them? I don't know, some people might order them when they get a listing, but then you take the risk of those documents being too old. Suppose you have a listing that takes 6 months to sell. Your documents might be too old, right? So then you would order them when you have a contract. Well, a lot of people like to wait until the inspection's over because a lot of times what's the reason our contracts fail? Usually because of inspections, right? So if you wait for the inspection, usually you're going to miss this 10 days, right? So it's important that you kind of understand you should probably order the documents when you have an agreement of sale, right? And then there's the question, who orders them and who pays for them? You know, in the past, it always been that I always said to my seller, look, you need to order the documents and you need to pay for them. But I know a lot of teams, and I know Matt Feddick and his group, and I know we have done this ourselves. I know Bridget and I have done it lately, we just go ahead and pay for the documents, and then we get reimbursed as a separate item on the settlement statement. Now, is there a risk there? Sure. We're putting our money out. The other day, I talked to one of the sellers and I said, do you want me to order the condo docs? And she goes, is there a fee? And I go, yeah. And she goes, yeah, I want you to order them. Of course, right? She doesn't want to use her money. She wants me to spend my money. And it was $206 to do that. So, you know, the question is, who's going to do it? Who's going to pay for it? You kind of need to think about this, and you should really have this discussion when you list the property, especially if you're listing a property, you know, it's going to be part of the Delaware Uniform Common Interest Ownership Act, right? To Kiowa, right? Then you should have this discussion with the seller and say, look, you're going to have to order these documents. They have the right to look them over, right? And they have 5 days to review them and decide if they want to buy the property or not. You know, one of the pitfalls, right, of these Kiowa documents, both for Maryland and Delaware, or the buyer can use this as an excuse to get out for any reason, right? So I've had people say to me, well, they don't like the inspection, but the sellers agreed to fix everything. And then my next question to that agent is it part of the Delaware Uniform Common Interest Ownership Act? In other words, is there a Kiowa disclosure? And they say yes. And then I say, have they received the documents? And they say no. And then I say, well, then the person can get out of the contract. They don't need a reason to get out. So they can not like the home inspection and just use the Kiowa out as their reason to get out and get their money back. And I know agents, that upsets a lot of agents. They say, well, you know, that's not true. They've told me this. I said, but the problem is that the agreement states that they can get out for any reason, okay? Right? For any reason. See, look right here. Or should the buyer find any reason, right, to find the information unacceptable, right? And the any reason is, well, I didn't like the inspection, so now I don't like the Kiowa documents, so I'm out. And really, we don't have a lot of teeth to fight that. They are out. And I've had, you know, they shouldn't be able to get out because they got the, you know, the seller agrees to fix the inspection, but the items. But the problem is they have the Kiowa out that allows them out for any reason. And you're not going to argue with that. If you go in front of a judge and you show him this form and he reads it and the timestamps show that they made the request to cancel before receiving these documents, you're going to lose. They're going to be able to get their money back. You still would need a release, but you know, it's, again, it's a reason for people to get out, right? And I've had people, let me start this over. When I first started in real estate, I had an agent in our office, right? And that agent, their whole premise on selling, especially condos, they would say to them, oh, well, you can get out of the contract at any time, so don't worry about it. Let's just make the offer, right? And how many of her deals do you think fell through? And I would guess, just on the experience I'm watching, that probably 7 to 8 out of 10 deals that people would cancel because she had planted the seed in the back of their mind when they made the offer. Oh, well, you can always cancel. You know, I'm not a believer of that. I want people that want to buy the property so long as what they're getting is there's no surprises. And that's what these documents tell us. Is there a surprise? You know, is there a special assessment? Are the fees actually what they said they are? Right? That's why you have those agreements. But to sell the premise that, oh, you can just back out because you have this right of rescission, you're kind of setting yourself up for failure because the people are always on their mind. So, oh, well, we can back out and get our money back. So, and again, looking at Delaware here, here's a utility form, right? Now, I can't say I've ever used this, but look, here's the utilities, and at the bottom, here's the homeowners association. You know, if you want to be very thorough, you could have this filled out with your listing, right? Or sometime during the process. But what other form do we have? Again, the blank addendum, you could use this addendum, which we know is an attorney's favorite addendum, right? It's blank, right? But you could put in here that the buyer and seller acknowledge receipt of the documents and they are satisfied with them, and they are going to move forward, right? You could use the blank addendum for that. I do believe in Maryland there is a certificate or a notification that you can that you've received it, right? It might be this one. Let's see. Yeah, this is a part of it. I'm sorry, but there isn't actually. I think it's. I didn't load it, but if I look back up here at documents and I go to template and I go down to Maryland condo, you would think it would be one of these first ones, but it should say acknowledgement. And I think, here we go. See, I typed in the search. All right, let's copy this form. Okay. And I'm sorry, yeah, this is the same form, so it's not the one I was looking for. But there's an acknowledgement of receipt and of information. And I must load it 3 times here. So let's see what this one is. Yeah, this is the same one, a different one with about the declarations. But anyway, there is a form that says that the owner or the buyer actually acknowledges receipt of the documents, and sometimes that's their beginning date, right? Again, here's the resale certificate for Delaware. Right? You can see it's kind of filled out. I don't know if I would want the owner to fill this out or the condo company. It could be done by either, but usually you're going to have, and then look, here's an acknowledgement here of received by the buyer. So Delaware has this built in that they've received it. Okay. Says if a fee of blank or no more than 250, if electronic form no more than 250, if paper is due or has been paid, circle 1, the association managed company for the certificate and copies, no fee may be charged if the association fails to fails to provide this complete certificate and copies of existing documents within 10 days after a written paper or electronic request. So they're saying here that they can't charge you if you request and it's been more than 10 days. But honestly, if you want the forms from them and you say it's more than 10 days, a lot of times I wonder if we give them to you. You could point that out to them, but you know, I wonder if they would really do that. Here's a document and release of DCIA contingency. So this is the one I was looking for Maryland. This one says that the undersigned acknowledges received of the HOA documents on, you put the date, and and the community, and then it says here they accept them, they reject, or mutual release. So I guess you would use this with they've decided to reject or mutual release, or if they're going to accept it, this is an acknowledgement. So you could use this form and again, have the buyer sign it and then the seller sign it. So this just is a CYA form. This says, hey, we've got the documents, we're good, we understand, we're moving forward, okay? Again, this one is the same as this one up here. Okay, so these two are same, they just have different names in our folder. Again, we looked at the flow chart, and then this is the HOA condo or co-op addendum. This one, again, is kind of a questionnaire thing. I haven't seen this one used a whole lot, but it's more like an informational form. It's not really the form, and they call that an addendum, but I have not seen that one used very much. The one that's usually used, I believe, was this one. No, not that one either. I'm sorry. It was the one that had the paragraph of the 10 days and the 5 days. That's the one I see used more than any others. You can see my internet's a little slow. Hopefully it doesn't affect me talking to you. If it does, I apologize. Do we have any questions? Hope it wasn't too confusing. You can see my screen is just in dot loop wonderland. But again, here we go. Seems to be the story of my life when it comes to MediaCom. So anyway, if you have any questions, feel free to either text me or email. If you'd like a copy of these documents, I'm happy to share this loop with you. I suggest that you strongly familiarize yourself with these documents. And if you have any problems or need help, don't hesitate to reach out to either myself or Bridget or even Brad or Sandy Green. You know, they're very knowledgeable in these. And the big deal is that when people want to get out and they use this as an excuse, just know that they can for any reason. This is an excuse to get out because you can't force them to become partners with the HOA or the condo. And that's really the whole purpose of this disclosure. So,
Hey, Walt, in
Yes.
Maryland, are there any requirements on the reserve study?
no.
Okay,
Obviously, if the unit that we're selling that's less than 7 units, that is actually 4 units, there is no reserve study.
Okay.
Now, I know in Delaware, a lot of times I'll see it as part of their professional package. They'll have a reserve study in there. But in Delaware, in Maryland, I don't see the reserve study a lot. In fact, I can say I see it probably less than 25%. Do you know, is that a requirement in Delaware to have a
yeah,
reserve?
I've been the president of 2 HOAs. And reserve studies required, and it has to be refreshed every 5 years. It's the responsibility of the officer.
Okay, well, that's good to know. Because in Maryland, a lot of the larger projects do have reserve studies where they have an engineer come in and give them usually it's a 10-year plan on what they need to do and how they need to budget to reserve that. But with those smaller condos, especially the ones that are self-managed, you know, when you have 4 owners, you know, the reserve study would probably cost them, you know, those studies probably cost $5,000 to $10,000 just to get done, depending on the size of the project and the property.
Yeah, we've got a 22-unit development, and it's $5,000 to get it refreshed.
Yeah, I'm sure. So, and again, there's a lot of loopholes, but the main thing is that you understand, and yes, this is the form I was looking for, right? This is the one that seems to be the one that covers condos as well as HOAs for Delaware. Well, I'm sorry if I didn't cover anything, but I think I covered most of it. As you can see, there's a lot of different forms. They can be confusing. I suggest that you kind of familiarize yourself with the forms, especially if you're doing Maryland and Delaware. And then if you're not sure what form to use, you know, reach out for help and ask for suggestions. You know, condos and HOAs, we see more and more of that. I mean, along the coast, we see that a lot. You know, and in Bright MLS, there's actually a search on whether you want to be part of one or whether you don't want to be part of one. You can search, because I do get people that say to me, I do not want to be part of an HOA. And it's usually because they've had a bad experience or they've heard things that say, you know, you can't do certain things. You know, if it's a commercial contractor, he may not be able to park his truck on the street, or he may not be able to park driveway, or whatever it is that needs. I know in certain areas you cannot park boats in your driveway, right? And you have to abide and amend by all the rules and regulations. Now, other people love that. They say that it keeps everyone the same. You know, it makes sure that if there's a new roof, I don't have to worry about it, right? If there's landscaping, I don't want to come home and cut grass. You know, there's good and there's bad. You pay for it one way or the other.
The other thing, particularly in the beach communities, one of the more important things that's either in or not in HOA docs that people need to be, that buyers are concerned about, is whether property can be rented, and if there's a minimum period of time that in order for a rental to be permitted. There's some communities that completely prohibit renting. Then there are others that allow any kind of renting, and then there's some will say it's got to be at least a month long term or 6 month term or year long term. So you've got somebody looking to buy property that might be wanting to use it for investment or rental purposes. Understanding that up front as part of a community is kind of important. It just takes a while to get used to knowing the various communities and whether they rent or not and what the requirements are.
Yeah, and that is a great point, and I'm glad you brought that up, because that also reminds me about pets. Some buildings have restrictions on the number of pets and the size. I know in Ocean City, certain buildings say you can't have a dog over 40 pounds. And I know a lot of people just say, oh, well, owners are allowed to have pets. And there are actually restrictions, especially when there was the pit bull scare several years ago. Some communities actually put that pit bulls weren't allowed, which Maryland actually disavowed that rule and said, no, you can't do that. But then they did other restraints, like no more than 2 pets, your pet can't be over 40 pounds. I mean, that would cut my dog out because I think my dog's close to 50 pounds. So, you know, there's that kind of thing, as well as, like you said, rentals. There was a property yesterday where I understand that people backed out because they couldn't do weekly rentals, but they could do long-term rentals of 3 months or more. And they had asked that question up front. They were told up front that that was the case, but then when they got the docs and read it, they used the documents to back out. The agent was very upset, but honestly, when they got the documents, they still had that right of rescission, and they exercised it, and they used it as an excuse to get out on the contract. The agent was very upset because he said, look, Walt, I told them that up front before they bought it, but you know, somehow I think they had a change of heart. And again, that's what people do. They use this as an excuse to get out. And I think it's important that you don't kind of sell that when you're writing the contract, because you're going to have an iffy buyer the whole time. And they're going to, if they keep asking you, well, when is that date that I can't cancel anymore? You got to wonder in the back of their mind, are they really committed to buying the property or not? And I appreciate, Mike, that's a great point. And I appreciate you bringing that up, because you're right. You got to ask the people, why are you buying it? And are you going to rent there? Now, a lot of times you have a renter that turns into a buyer and they say, oh, well, we rented in this building before. But I know the way some associations are trying to control, like VRBO and Airbnb and things like that, is by having restrictions on rentals, and certain neighborhoods just say no rentals whatsoever. I know in my neighborhood, you are not allowed to rent your house. You know, if you were an investor, that would cut you out right away up front. Any other points, questions? If not, I appreciate your time. I wish you all the best. If you have any questions, please ask. And if not, go out there and sell something. Thanks. See you guys.